Hello and welcome to another video that will get you the top grades. We have another in the series of 30 out of 30 answers, and we're looking at poetry comparison, but even better than that, two poems which are really useful because they can be compared to so many others. So we're looking at Poppies and War Photographer. Here is a sample exam question that we're going to look at. I will take you through a full mark answer so that you can see what the examiner's comments at the side actually mean. There are lots of them. On the way, I will keep coming back to these 6 key lessons that give you a 30 out of 30 answer. In particular, your ability to write about form and structure. And if you take notes from the essay, you can actually reproduce this in your own essays in the exam. You'll obviously adapt it to your question, but the ideas will boost your revision to grade 9. Let's get straight into the essay. So Sanjay begins with a short thesis statement, which obviously includes words from the title. In both poems, War Photographer and Poppies, the poets present war as very influential on people that are not directly involved in the conflict. In War Photographer, the poem is structured with 4 stanzas with 6 lines each. This uniformity could suggest the rigid and incorrigible nature of war, but also how the photographer is, and I can't read that word, with her emotions. She has a job to do and shows no feeling of remorse to the 100 agonies. So this is an attempt to deal with form. It's not quite describing the form of the poem, but it is linking the structure of the poem to a meaning that the poem wants to show that war cannot be defeated. It is undefeatable, and they've used this word, Sanjay's used this word, incorrigible, to mean that. Now we have a contrast immediately to the other poem. Now, although this isn't a technique that's useful at A-level, it's very useful at GCSE because it means you never forget to compare. When we look at the mark scheme, you'll see how important that is, because if you're not writing a comparison, you simply can't get into the top bands. So, in contrast, Poppies is in the form of a dramatic monologue. Now Sanjay's nailed the form. He's got a word, a phrase to describe it as a dramatic monologue. He's away. We only hear from the mother exemplifying her dominance. But it is ironic, as she was powerless to stop her intoxicated son from leaving. Perhaps Weir is exploring how the patriarchy also plays a part on the mother. That's a really good point, but it's not explained or developed, which is sad. So both poems have contrasting characters. In War Photographer, there's the character is devoid of emotions, whereas in Poppies they're overwhelmed with it, meaning emotions, but are unable to do anything about it. So we've seen some writing about form, we've seen Sanjay write about the methods, what the poet's up to. We've linked this to the poet's purpose using the word perhaps. This shows that you're being exploratory. And exploratory is right at the top of the mark scheme. If we come down a level, you only have to be detailed. So being exploratory forces the examiner to think you're worth at least 26 marks out of 30. Now Sanjay's going to go to a new method, which will be biblical imagery. Both poems use biblical imagery to express war, but for completely different purposes. In War Photographer, it is as if the photographer is a priest preparing to intone a mass. This connotes how the photographer has a solemn role to carry out and is acknowledging the lies of those lost at war. In addition, all flesh is grass is a biblical allusion to Isaiah, I can't read the number of that chapter, in which life is explained to be transitory. Perhaps Duffy is explaining how war is anti-Christian and that it is futile. In Poppies, so again that comparison straight away, in Poppies, Weir gives a biblical allusion to Jesus through the black thorns of your hair. This connotes Jesus' crown. Remember, he had a crown of thorns put on his head when he was crucified. This may be symbolic of how the mother's son was going to make a sacrifice just like Jesus. Therefore, we could be using this to explain how sacrifice in war is a fundamental part of Christianity and should be celebrated. Now, the examiner's not wholly convinced by this, I think, because they've probably read the poem like I do as an anti-war poem, and that she wouldn't have a Christian feeling that it was his duty to go away, and consequently the examiners hedged their bets with level 5 on everything. But the good news is that doesn't matter. Every essay I read from exam boards, where they've been marked like this, every top grade essay always starts with level 5 comments, and it's only as the essay continues that the examiner says, all right, now I'm convinced and I'm going to bump you up to level 6, and that happens again further down here. Now the reason for that is what's in this column here. Level 6 means you have to be convincing, and there aren't really that many extra skills other than writing about form and structure. The only real skill is you just have to keep going, so that comments that the examiner thought were thoughtful and developed are now convincing because there are so many of them. So a good tip is to practice writing a lot in your exam time. Now we have a new paragraph, and Sanjay is going to give us another method. Both poems have different timescales in which the characters are affected by the consequence of war. In War Photographer, people are only concerned between the bath and pre-lunch beers. The internal rhymes speed up the sentence's pace, drawing parallels to how people of the Sunday supplements only have momentary value of sorrow. It's not very well explained, but you know what he means, that the reader only feels momentary sorrow because they read these supplements quickly. To further emphasize this disconnection between people and the effects of war, the sudden declarative rural England uses caesura to almost mimic how the people of England are separated from the vanity of war. Now, the word caesura doesn't just score marks because it's subject terminology, it's terminology about the poem's structure, which you remember appears at the top of the mark scheme, form and structure. If we come down to level 5, you need structure or form to get the grades. So having form up there has also boosted him into the top band. You can get grade 7 in level 5, by the way, so this is a fantastic band to be in, but so easy to get into once you write about structure. If we come down to level 4, where grades 6 and 5 are, you'll see that there is no reference to structure and form at all. So just by writing about structure and form, you leap up the mark schemes to at least grade 7. Well, what's not to like about that? Hopefully you're stealing ideas from Sanjay's essay as I speak. Alternatively, the sudden declarative is sandwiched between two far more convoluted sentences which conform to the trauma theory, in which people that have been influenced by violence try to consciously ignore it. Well, I don't buy that interpretation, but doesn't matter. He's making a point and linking it to the quotation, so he gets away with it. And that's the way the examiner is trained. So, people are seen to only seem to see the devastating effects for a minute fraction. In stark contrast to this, there is that comparison immediately again of the method. Weir structures her poem to highlight how war leaves a permanent. And notice how Sanjay uses the word structure to say to the examiner, hey, Miss or Mrs. or Mr. Examiner, pay attention. I'm writing about structure, and you and I both know that puts me in the top 2 bands. I'm after at least a grade 7, please. Mark on the mother. At the end of the poem, she explains how she can hear his voice catch on the wind, which signifies her sense of compassion, but also the fact that she's redundant. he needs to explain that point. It's a really good one. Likewise, in the beginning of the poem, we are given the impression of her getting ready to mourn Armistice Sunday. There is a cyclical structure in the poem that constantly exposes the mother's sense of sadness. It is unbearable, and she's focused, or forced rather, to always think about it. Quotation would help here to develop that point. You can notice that there's no tick and there's no AO comment from the examiner. They're sort of holding their breath and seeing if the answer has a bit more evidence in it. But this is at least level 5. Similarly, this is further seen when Weir intertwines domestic language with military language to explore the domineering effect of war on people. So now we can see the examiners getting excited because we've got level 6 coming up as an annotation. And what's going on here is Sanjay is talking about two sorts of language, the military language in the poem and the domestic language. Not only is he going to be able to quote brilliantly, but this contrast of language is always a structure point. So whenever you write about contrast, it's always structure, and you're always into grade 7 or above. So, crimped petals has multiple interpretations. Crimped also means to enlist. Weir could be writing her poem as a diatribe to show how the government force young people to war. Well, I had no idea that that was an interpretation of crimped. I'll just take Sanjay's word for it. Certainly the examiner has. The intertwining of military and domestic language could perhaps highlight how everything the mother does is now tainted with the image of her son's fate. This textile imagery, ornamental stitch, may have been purposefully used by Weir, who used to work in the textile industry. The stitch could connote how she has been trapped in the layers of emotions and can control them, further seen by the enjambment. So the examiner is convinced by this context, the understanding of the stitch, and how this actually represents something about the poet's or the persona's emotional state. Now, it's important to point out here that I'm not convinced by this interpretation of stitch. But that doesn't matter, because look what's going on in the examiner's head. Sanjay's first page, Sanjay's second page, Sanjay's third page. Because he's making so many detailed comparisons all the way through, the examiner is willing to give the doubt. Yes, this is more than thoughtful and developed. I am now convinced, because Sanjay has written so much. There are two other effects on the examiner's mind which are quite interesting. Firstly, the handwriting is not that neat, and typical of academic writers who have lots of ideas and they're writing at speed. It's just neat enough. And the other thing we can see are these crossings out, where we get a sense of a student rethinking what they're writing in order to write a better argument. Don't be afraid of crossing ideas out as you go and improving as you go, because it has a psychological effect on the examiner. It says, this student thinks hard, this student knows their stuff and wants to get even better. That's a top student. Now, just in case some of you are thinking, oh, well, I'll just cross some stuff out at random. No, don't do that. But it should give you confidence to write your first idea down, because that will be good enough to get you going on the rest of the sentence, and then cross bits out that don't work. Right, let's now look at the conclusion. In conclusion, both poems present war to have a large impact on people not at war directly, but have an intractable link to it. So maybe that's not intractable, but there you go. That's one of those things where you've got bad handwriting. You give the student the benefit of the doubt. But what's going on here is Sanjay is going back to the original question, which was about the effect of war on individuals who aren't at war, and making sure that he answers the question properly. Although in Duffy's poem it seemed to have a lesser impact than on the mother, as she is distraught or distracted after he'd gone, which provides an enigmatic double ending for either the son's departure or his death. Now notice the examiner's been hanging around hoping to give a level 6 AO1 comment. If we go up, there's AO2 and AO3, context and method. And there it was again when we were looking at structure, context and method. So we have to keep going right back towards the beginning for a comment about language, which was only, I say only, it's still brilliant, level 5. And so this is what the examiner's hanging about for. Can I find some precise references that are used really judiciously? Well, if you've got one of those references, i.e. a quotation, in your conclusion, that's obviously judicious. And boom, up into level 6 you go in the examiner's mind. So you should have taken notes on these 6 things to boost your revision and essay writing. So look out for videos and playlists, which should be popping up all over the screen somewhere. So get clicking on some videos or playlists that will pop up on this screen and give you more 30 out of 30 essays. Remember, there's no law against you stealing these ideas, stealing this vocabulary, stealing these sentences and using them in your own essays. Good luck. See you soon on my channel.